So, do I go?
Oh, I didn't know that part.
This is worth
repeating.
Okay.
This is worth repeating.
Live storytelling from Texas Public Radio.
Welcome to the first ever virtual episode of Texas Public Radio's Worth Repeating Storyteller Series. I'm Kim Johnson. Life is upside down right now, and it's supposed to be the new normal. We're keeping our distance, we're video conferencing, we're working from home, and for some reason we're hoarding toilet paper. It's serious. Job losses, food insecurity, missed milestones, and hospitals on overload. But sometimes change brings out the best in us. We're checking on our neighbors, expressing gratitude to essential workers, and choreographing family dance routines for TikTok. While we miss the human touch, we're also learning new ways of human connection. The truth is, life will never be the same. For better or worse, this is our new normal. Troy Peters is well known as the music director for the youth orchestras of San Antonio, but also plays in a local rock band. Their debut album has been a long time coming, and Troy refuses to let anything, including a pandemic, keep them from moving forward.
About 10 years ago, my family and I moved from Vermont to Texas. When an old friend who had moved to San Antonio a few years earlier saw on Facebook that I was in town, he invited me to lunch at Rosario's. Richard Keith and I hadn't seen each other since the 1980s when we were high school friends in Tacoma, Washington. We picked up right where we left off though. Our families started hanging out, and then he and I started playing music together as a hobby. When we added a drummer and a bass player, we decided to call our band Slowpoke because it took us nearly 30 years of friendship before we formed a band. Well, the COVID-19 outbreak this spring derailed or interrupted a lot of things. For Slowpoke, it meant hitting pause on recording our first album. We were about halfway done when it became clear that it wasn't safe for us to be together in the studio. And this was a real gut punch. After almost 5 years of playing gigs and trying out songs and finding our sound, we were stopped dead in our tracks. So what do you do as a band when no venues are open to play in and it isn't wise to even practice together in the same room? For a lot of bands, the answer has been quarantine videos, with each band member playing in a different location. But teleconferencing software like Skype or Zoom introduces slight time delays as video and audio pass through the internet. This delay is called latency, and it makes it almost impossible to play music together over the internet. By the time I hear the drummer's beat and play along with it, I'm just a little bit behind. The next time you're in a Zoom meeting, try to get everybody to clap their hands together just once, and you'll immediately see how tough an obstacle this can be. So, how do we overcome latency? Well, the people in quarantine videos, whether it's the Roots or the New York Philharmonic, actually play their own parts separately at different times. And the final result is a product of hours of editing to line up and connect the separate contributions of each participating musician. Well, when Slowpoke made our first quarantine video at the end of March, our drummer, Eric, played his part alone first. Then our bass player, Brandon, recorded his part listening to Eric's recording on earbuds. I went next, and again, wearing earbuds, then Richard was last. And with some patient work in the editing room, we got everything to line up pretty well. I mean, it was a bit of a slog, but it was also great fun because Slowpoke's sound started to reemerge. For our newest video, Sail Across the Sea, we wanted to take things one step further. Richard had written 2 songs this winter that he and I had workshopped with just the 2 of us, figuring out harmonies and vocal arrangements. But because the band had been busy recording other songs, we hadn't taken the time to introduce these new tunes to the rest of the band. What if we tried to record a video performance of a song that we had never even played together in the same room before? Well, since Richard and I had already worked out the shape of these songs together, we were able to give our 2 bandmates a clear roadmap through music notation and a pre-recorded track, an electronic version of the bare bones of the song. After each band member recorded his own part over the track, then we took that electronic track away. Then we re-recorded a few more details, responding to how others had played their parts, and recreating the kind of give and take we normally have in rehearsal. But it just takes a little bit longer for it all to play out. Given the history that Richard and I share, I think it's especially fitting that Sail Across the Sea is really about reconnecting with a friend from high school. A few years ago, Richard and I went to our 30th high school reunion together, and we even played a few Slowpoke songs at that event. Richard's experience there, reconnecting with old friends, led to this poignant set of lyrics about the summer we turned 17. It seems like an apt topic for this time of social distancing when all of us are longing to reconnect with friends, old and new. And someday, we'll even be able to sail across the sea again.
After a beautiful wedding, Anea Lupton and her husband rode a wave of joy and love out of San Antonio and came home to find that their life as newlyweds would be anything but normal.
On March 7th, 2020, Joseph, Eric, and I got married under this old oak tree right next to the Pedernales River at the Lyndon B. Johnson State Park. We cried, we prayed, our friends read poetry, and we sang Geranium kisser, throat of soil and mind like stone. We smeared ash on our hands, and we laughed when the cows came running by to listen to the string quartet. We roasted this beautiful pig and drank sangria and explored the park grounds in our boots. Our friends and family gave really sweet toasts as we ate cake and polvorones and pan dulce. And our day was loosely scheduled. We moseyed about at our own leisure, and so did our friends. The afternoon seemed to rekindle some old flames, and many a lovebird was noted just kind of nestled up on a picnic blanket, watching the river go by. Our friends colored pictures of the places where Joseph and I went on our first dates, like to add a girl, and they also drew pictures of the suture baths in San Francisco where he proposed. It was a day of endless hugs and kisses and wiping tears from the cheeks, activities that seem so foreign to us now and almost scary. The next day, we traveled to Mexico City for our honeymoon, and it was this dream we didn't want to wake up from. Just the two of us in Roma Norte. We loved the city and just the architecture. We visited galleries and museums every day, and we practiced our Spanish, and every evening opened up the windows so we could just breathe in the fresh air and the sounds of the street below. It was lovely. And this one day when we were walking through the park, we were talking about how important multi-generational living is to us, how we want our children, our future children, to grow up with our parents, and how we just want to live like closer to our friends and just be around the people that we love. And just then we saw this boy teaching his abuelo how to ride a bike, and it just was all kind of serendipitous to how we felt and what we wanted. And when we returned home, we came back to a house just full of empty wine bottles and dried flowers, unopened gifts, and one last slice of wedding cake wrapped up tight in the fridge. And we returned home to a series of text messages and voicemails from friends and family wondering if we were okay because the stores had just been cleared out from the first rounds of panic shopping. And we suddenly just felt so vulnerable in a way that was a new normal to us as newlyweds, isolated with nowhere to hide our vulnerabilities, and learning how the other grapples with fear and with hope in the span of days rather than years. It was this new normal. And we think back to these vows that we made for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. They're just much more poignant now. But it's also worth noting that some of the words are still the same. I love you. Let's watch one more episode. I love you. Do you want the last slice? I want you. Can I tell you about this chapter I just read? I love you.
Alvin McCrae and Jason Rudman were already adjusting to a new normal after shaking things up both at home and work. San Antonio was a new chapter in their family story, but no one expected this plot twist.
As wonderful as our life is, it is definitely not without uncertainty. My name is Alvin McCrae, and COVID-19 added a level of complexity to the uncertainties and challenges of moving to a new city.
So my name is Jason Rudman. I'm Alvin's husband. And we decided to move to San Antonio from Cleveland, Ohio in late fall of last year for a couple of reasons. First, a great professional opportunity for me in the city. And then second, the opportunity to buy our first house. We have two kids, 6.5 and 4. And for the past couple of decades, we've lived in New York City and Cleveland in condos. So the opportunity to have a house with a pool, really, really appealing. And here we are in San Antonio.
Right. So, and as part of the move, I resigned from my role as brand director at United Way. And for the first few months here, I basically organized our home and got the kids acclimated to their new schools.
That's right. And one of the things we also love to do is travel. It's been a constant in our life. And we're really fortunate that we actually can show the kids different cultures. And so as part of what has become a tradition, at the end of last year, we took the kids to the UK so that they could hang out with their grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins.
And after returning from that trip, came back to San Antonio, we began to fully embrace our new home. Around mid-January, I began to search for jobs and marketing, hopefully find a role soon. Fast forward, March, Jason and I took a trip. To Cartagena, Colombia to celebrate a milestone birthday, but this time without the kids.
Without the kids,
yes.
Very important. Sometimes.
You have to do it. And then returning home from that trip, I planned a surprise party for Jason here at our home. But that was around the same weekend the government ramped up warnings on domestic travel due to the impending coronavirus. But 20 of our 40 guests from various cities around the country still showed up.
So a great weekend. Towards the end of the weekend, a couple of our guests started feeling ill. And so after everybody had left on that Monday, I too started feeling ill. Shortness of breath, cough, fever, headaches, all of the symptoms tied to the coronavirus. So I took myself to the ER at that point, very early in the pandemic. And overnight, they ran a battery of tests. They took a bunch of blood, nasal swabs, CT scan, chest x-ray, and effectively ruled out COVID and sent me home with what they said was flu-like symptoms.
Yep. And with the children being homeschooled at this point because of the virus, Jason and I took it upon ourselves to, out of an abundance of caution, to self-quarantine him for 7 days. 2 days later, we received a phone call from our guests that a couple have indeed tested positive for COVID-19.
So at this point, I'd already stopped working. My symptoms were getting worse. Real shortness of breath, could barely walk to the end of the driveway. And so as the symptoms were ramping up, I took myself back to the hospital. At that point, they administered a full coronavirus test. Turned out to be positive. I'd also developed pneumonia in my right lower lung.
Yeah. And so with the challenges of Jason being, self-quarantined for 18 days, a new challenge was for us as a family was that I would be the sole provider for the kids from an emotional perspective and homeschooling and cooking and taking care of all their needs and nursing Jason back to health, essentially.
Well, I think you effectively had to put your job search on hold at that point, right?
Yeah.
And I think the additional uncertainty of not really knowing what the coronavirus was and how it and what was going to happen just added that, we've been together for 22 years. That just added a level of uncertainty that just goes to show you that you never know what life is going to cook up and present to you.
Yeah. And still, as a family, we're still trying to figure out and how to adapt and adopt to this new city during this COVID-19 pandemic. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually a silver lining. Since I can't find a job and can't do any job searching, it enables me to be home with the kids, to be that constant point of contact for them from a spiritual, educational, emotional perspective, while Jason is able to focus on his job.
Running a small business is hard work. No one knows that better than Rebel, who runs a vegan restaurant, bar, and music venue. So when that fast-paced way of life ground to a halt, Rebel decided to get back to her roots, literally.
Saturdays are the busiest day of the week at La Botanica. As soon as we open our doors, you'll see people rushing in for a late lunch or an early dinner. During the day, you'll see elderly couples, groups of friends just wanting to chill on the patio, families with their children and their dogs. The kids are quickly eating their quesadilla so that they can leave the table and go explore the plants and dance on the stage. As the placement of the sun starts to change, though, so does the crowd. More couples enter. We've had many first dates at La Botanica. You get the queerdos, the weirdos, the college kids, the out-of-town vegan musicians who came to eat dinner because they have a gig later on the strip that night. The comadres having a bachelorette party. They all start to stream in. La Bee is just one of the many stops along the busy party street of the St. Mary's Strip. No one Saturday night is exactly as the other. It is a beautiful whirlwind I have come to love. This is how I've spent most of my Saturday nights for the past 4.5 years. And then boom, pandemic. And almost suddenly, all of the movement was halted. And within a matter of days, a once very busy and sometimes rowdy strip was quiet. It was eerie for me. It was like a small town that had been abandoned that you might drive through on a road trip where all the businesses are boarded up. The quietness of the first weekend of the lockdown was something I had never experienced before. We immediately reduced our hours and how we operated at La Botanica. We wanted to keep serving the public and the community as long as we could do it safely. With the reduced days and hours meant I had more time at home to spend with Amanda. She too had been instructed to work from home. So there we were, day and night with each other, and right at the beginning of spring. The hardest adjustment for me was slowing down. When you run a venue, you don't get a lot of downtime. But a month and a half after the quarantine, I'm really remembering how much I enjoy living at a slower pace. We're not so busy rushing out the door anymore that we don't notice the squash blossoms that opened overnight, or that the monarch caterpillar we saw slithering up the side of the house has now cocooned in the corner. There's a local nursery evergreen. It's located on Hildebrand, just a little west of Blanco. Perhaps you know it. It's a magical place. Edward is a friend of mine and he owns it. When I go, we stroll the aisles of plants and he hands me leaves of herbs to taste and nibble on. We talk about all sorts of things. Last year when I went in, I asked him what plant I could put around the house that butterflies liked and that they could use. He answered milkweed. So I got a milkweed, and after a little bit of trial and error, I found a place that it was happy to grow in the yard. Before the quarantine, when I spoke to Amanda about plants, she didn't really pay much attention. But now, with more time, when I spoke about them, she had the energy to listen. One morning, we saw an open chrysalis and a monarch stretching its wings and letting them dry off while it was hovering on the citronella plant. The sight sparked a memory for me. It reminded me of a poem I had read, this poem called Butterflies. It was written by Subcomandante Marcos of the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas is a group of indigenous folks who took their land and sovereignty back from Mexico's control in the 90s. In the middle of the poem it reads, "With its flight, the flying rebellion that is, the butterfly is saying no, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will be as wonderful as seeing the audacity of that flight, appreciating the challenge it represents, feeling how it starts to agitate the wind, and seeing how with those drafts, it is not the leaves of the trees that tremble, but the legs of the powerful, who until then naively thought that butterflies died if they flew out over the sea. It is well known that butterflies, like rebellions, are contagious." When I read that poem for the first time, it stoked a fire that was already burning inside of me, and every time I read it, it reignites and fuels it. As things begin to metamorphosize into a new normal for all of us, I want to keep that syncopation with nature that I've been able to get on. I want to keep dancing and I want to keep flying. And my hope is that you will join me.
Thanks for joining us for this virtual edition of Texas Public Radio's Worth Repeating. Worth Repeating is made possible by support from the 80/20 Foundation and sponsorship from Generations Federal Credit Union, Niche at Pearl, the Mind Science Foundation, and Shiner Beer. More information about Worth Repeating and how to support Texas Public Radio is online at tpr.org. We can't wait to see y'all next season, but until then, stay safe, be well.